In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural parquet wood floor material. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description on my Gumroad and Patreon. So this material is going to come as a custom node group, so you can customize the look of the material. So you can change the scale to change the size of the entire material, and then there's also 4 different wood colors. So you can change all the different colors 1 through 4, if maybe you want more of a yellowish wood or a lightish wood or more of a reddish wood or a darker wood. Then there's also the plank's brightness, so you can see there's a little bit of variation in the different planks. So some planks are lighter and some planks are darker. So there's plank's brightness 1 and then plank's brightness 2. So you can change these to make all the planks darker or lighter, or just have more variation. Then there also is the roughness of the material, so you can make it like a really shiny floor or a bit more rough. Then there's also some noise settings, so there is the noise detail, so I can turn that detail down. There's also the noise roughness, so if I turn this down, you can kind of see the wood looks a bit different. It almost looks like a bit of a stylized wood texture. And then there's also the noise distortion. Then there's also the wood bump strength, so if I zoom in really close to the reflections, it's a little bit hard to see, but there is a tiny little bit of bump over the surface. You can kind of see it right there. So there is the wood bump strength, and then there's also the planks bump strength. So that's going to be the little tiny edges there between the planks. So if I just turn these up a lot higher to like maybe an 8, you can see them a lot better. So you can see there is the wood bump strength and then also the planks bump strength, which is kind of the edges of those planks. And then finally, there is the wood rotation, so you can rotate the wood on the X, Y, and Z axis. Now this material is also using the UV coordinates, so you can UV unwrap your object. Like for example, you can UV unwrap a plane, maybe you have a plane as a floor, and then you can just use the UVs to place it on the object. You can change it to the object coordinates if you want to, but I'm keeping it as the default of UVs. But then you can change the X, Y, and Z rotation. For most things, you probably just want to change the Z rotation to kind of rotate it around. So if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my materials. And my Ultimate Material Pack comes with all of my materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. So before we create the material, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the scene the same way that I have. So I went to the add menu and I went to mesh and I added an icosphere, and then right behind me on the add icosphere settings, I just turned the subdivisions up to 6 so it is nice and smooth and round, and then I'll shade the object smooth. Then I went to the add menu, I added a plane because I want to preview on a flat plane, and I'll bring it over and then I'll rotate it on the X by 90 degrees and I'll scale it up a bit so we just have kind of a plane there in the background. So then I added a camera and I just pointed the camera right there at the objects, so we have the plane in the background and the sphere in the front. Now if I hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view, I'm going to zoom into the sphere and I'll go into edit mode. And I'll select everything and I'm going to hit U and I'm going to unwrap project from view. So this way it'll use the UV map project from view, so it'll be straight on. So that way it'll look good from the camera's perspective. And then the plane already has a UV map. Now for the lighting, I added this area light right here. So you can go to the add menu, go to light and add the area light. And so on this area light, I turn the power to 250 and I turn the shape to disk, and I just pointed it kind of here on the side of the object to give some nice bright lighting. And then I also added these 2 other area lights right here. So these are going to be basically like rim lights. So for these area lights, I turn the shape to rectangle and change the X and Y size so it's really long, and I turn the power to 60. So I have one area light right over here on this side to give a rim light on this side of the sphere, and then another area light right down here to give another kind of rim light to the edge of the sphere. Then I also went here to the world properties and I added this row stock large airport 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. So the link is in the video description if you want to download it. And here on the color, I clicked on the yellow dot and I clicked on environment texture, and then you can just click on open and add in the HDRI. And I downloaded the 1K HDR version. And then I also turned the strength down to 0.5 so it's not quite as strong. Then if I go here to the render properties and go down to the color management, I'm going to turn the view transform to filmic, and I'm going to set the look to very high contrast to pop out the colors and make everything more contrasted and saturated. So I'm in the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'll go into the rendered view, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'm going to select the object and I will add a new material, and I can just rename the material. And then I want to click and drag and drop the same material onto the other object back here so they both have the same material. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video. So if you don't have that enabled, you can click on Edit, you can go to the Preferences, and then go to the Add-ons tab, and you can search for Node and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So I'm going to start by searching for a noise texture. Let's drop the noise texture here. And then to use the feature of the Node Wrangler, you can press Ctrl T with the noise texture selected, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I'm going to be using the UV coordinate, so I'll plug the UV here into the vector. And let's Ctrl Shift select the noise texture to preview it. And I'm going to change some of the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 6. And I'm going to turn the detail to 10, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.85, so it's pretty detailed. Then I'm going to turn this linearity to 3, and then I'm going to turn the distortion to 3 as well. Now what I'm going to do is select this mapping, and I'll hit Shift-D to duplicate it and drop it here so we have a second mapping. So this mapping will be used to change the size of the entire material, but this mapping can be just used to affect this noise texture. So what I'm going to do is take the scale X, and I'm going to scale it up here so that we can kind of squish the texture. So I'm going to scale it up by 6. And now that's going to look a lot more like a noise texture because you can see the wood pattern is going up and down. But I want to make it more contrasted, so I'm going to search for a color ramp. So search for ramp and add the color ramp, and we're going to drop it here after the noise texture. So let's change some of the color ramp tabs. So I'm going to drag the white tab kind of to about here. Then I'm going to hold down the Control key and click to add another tab. And I'm going to drag this tab kind of about there, and then I'll Control click again to add another tab right there. Then I'm going to Control click right here to add another tab, and this tab I'm going to make fully black, and I'll kind of drag it over. So you can kind of see by changing the white and black values, we're kind of getting those different bits of color there. So it's starting to look like wood. And then I'm going to Control click right here, and let's make this black as well. So we're going to have a black one, and then a white one, and then another black one, and then we're going to do another white one, followed by a black one really close to it, and then another white one. And you can see by dragging these around, it's kind of changing the contrast, especially this white one here, but I'm just going to leave it like that, so you can now see we're getting this really cool wood texture with lots of details. Now what I want to do is make the custom colors, so I'm going to search for a mix color, and let's drop the mix color up here, and we can put the color into the factor. So now for color A, I'm going to make this kind of like a light brown, kind of a light orange brown. And for color B, I'm going to make this kind of a dark reddish brown. And if you want to use the same exact colors that I'm using for color A, you can punch in a hex code of AF7154. And for color B, you can punch in a hex value of 7A423B. So then what I want to do is I want to make another variation of this texture, but with darker colors. So with the mix selected, I'll press Ctrl-Shift-D. Ctrl-Shift-D will duplicate the nodes, but keep the wires plugged up. And I'm just going to preview this mix here. So now we're going to make all the colors a bit darker. So we're going to make this kind of a darker brown, and this here as well, kind of a darker brown. And if you want to use the same hex codes for the darker brown, color A is going to be 49-2B1A, and then color B is going to be 2F1513. So now we have two different variations of our wood. So let's box select all of these nodes here. So the first mapping, the noise, color ramp, and mix. So with them selected, we're going to press F to join it together into a frame, and we can add a label, and I can just call this wood texture. This is totally optional, but I like to add frames to keep everything really nicely organized. And then I can kind of drag the mapping nodes back here because we're going to be using these for all the textures. So there is the base wood texture. Let's now create the texture for the wood plank. So for the wood planks, I'm going to search for a checker texture. We'll drop it up here, and I'll Control-Shift select the checker texture to preview it. And I'm going to take the mapping vector and put that into the vector of the checker texture. Now I do want to change the size of the UVs because you can see the UVs are pretty big. So you should have a UV editing workspace. So I'm just going to click here to go to the UV editing workspace, and I'm just going to select the object, make sure it's selected, and I'll hit the A key to select all the UVs, and I'll just scale the UVs up and place them right there in the center. So I want to have it just a little bit smaller than kind of this square here, but about that size. So basically like that. So now if I just go back here to the shading workspace, you can see the size is a little bit better. Now I want to have two checker textures, and we're going to use this to create the different boards. So I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-D to duplicate the checker texture, and then we'll change the colors. So on color 1, I'm going to make this fully white. And then for color 2, it's going to be a very, very, very light color, but slightly dark, and it's going to be 6Es. That is the hex code. Then let's go here to the bottom checker texture, and for these I want them to be a bit darker. So for color 2, this is just going to be fully black, but then for color 1, this is going to be kind of a mid-gray color, and the hex code is 7C, 7C, 7C. So now you can see if I Control-Shift select between these, we have a darker one and a lighter one. Now what I want to do is offset one of the checker textures, and then we're going to mix them together, and then that's going to look like the floorboards. So to offset it, I'm going to search for the mapping node, and we're going to put the mapping node here before the darker one. So I'll just drag it right up there. And also what I'm going to do is hold down the shift key and right click and drag over these wires, and that's going to add a reroute. So I'm just going to drag the reroute right up there to keep things nicely organized, and just drag this down. So we're now going to use this mapping to offset the texture. So what I'm going to do is use the scale X value. So if I use the scale X and turn this up, you can see now it looks like floorboards. So I'm going to turn the scale X value to 4. And so why I'm turning it to 4 is so that there's going to be 4 floorboards in each one of these textures. So if you kind of take a look at this checker, you can see there is this checkerboard right here. But if I change this to 4, now within the same exact size, there's going to be 4 floorboards. So now what I can do is mix these both together. So if I select both checker textures, I'll press Control 0. Control 0 is going to add a mix color. So let's just open it up and drag it over here. And I want the checker texture to be going into color A, and then the other bottom checker texture to be going into color B. Now on the factor here, I'm going to turn this to a 0.58, just a 0.58, so it's slightly more of the dark one. So now you can see it looks like they're both mixed together, and you can see all of the different boards have random colors. So some of them are lighter and some of them are darker. And then finally, I just want to add a color ramp to customize the colors a bit more. So I'm going to search for a ramp, and we're going to add a color ramp and drop the color ramp right here. And I'm going to drag the white tab over just to make everything just a little bit lighter. And then for the black tab, I'm going to make it kind of this mid-gray color. And the hex value for this color is going to be 737373. So now it's all just a bit lighter. So I'm going to box select all these nodes, press F. I can call this wood planks and hit enter. So we can keep everything really organized so we can remember what everything does. Let's hit Control S to save the project. So now what I want to do is mix the two textures together. So we're going to select the color ramp and then shift select this mix, and I'll hit Control 0 to add a mix color. So we'll drag it up here and open up the mix color. And I'm going to take this color ramp color and I'm going to put that into the factor. So the factor is determining what part is going to be color A and what part is going to be color B. So now we can take the wood texture here, we can take the bottom mix, and we can put that into color B. So now you can see that the lighter and darker values of the color ramp are determining what parts are going to be the light wood and what parts are going to be the dark wood. So if we just Control Shift select the mix here, you can now see that some of the planks are lighter and some of the planks are darker, and it looks random. So why I added this color ramp is you can see if I change the color up and down, that's kind of changing the colors. Also this one here, if I click on this color and drag up and down, that's customizing the colors. And also there is a bit of contrast. You can also drag this factor up and down, and that's kind of gonna blend between them. But you can see if I turn this up too high, it looks like there's a pattern, or if I make it too dark, you can't see the texture. So that's kind of just making it more random. Then what I also want to do is search for a hue saturation value, and I'll drop this after the mix here. So you can see I can change this value to make the entire thing lighter and darker. But I'll leave the settings at the default for now. So I'm going to box select these two nodes here, and I will press F, and I'm just going to call this like base color and hit enter. So now what I want to do is drag the principled shader back here, and I'm going to put the hue saturation value into the base color, and I'll just preview the principled shader. So it's starting to look like wood. Now I do want to add a roughness map so that some parts are a bit more rough and other parts are a bit more shiny, because right now if I just change the roughness, it looks super even and smooth. So I'm going to take this color up here from the wood texture, and I'll put the color into the roughness. So now if I kind of zoom in here close to the wood, you can see some parts are more rough and other parts are more shiny, but I do want to change how that looks so it's not quite as contrasted. So I'm going to search for a map range. A map range is similar to a color ramp, so you can use a map range to make the colors lighter and darker. So I can just Control Shift select the map range, and if I drag the values, you can kind of see it's making some parts lighter and other parts darker. So what I'm going to do is turn the from min to 0.6, then the from max to a 1.5, so it's a bit darker, and then the to min I'm going to turn to a 0.45, and then the to max I'm just going to leave at 1. So now you can see it's all a bit lighter and less contrasted. So if I just preview the principled shader, you can now see that looks a lot more like wood, so there's just slight variation in the roughness. And then I'm also going to search for a hue saturation value, and we're going to put this after the color ramp. And this way we have this single value which I can drag up and down to make the entire thing more rough or more shiny, so we can use that later in the custom node group. So I'm going to box select these two nodes and press F, and I can just call this roughness and hit enter just so that everything's really nicely organized. So now what I want to do is create another group of textures, which is going to be a bump map, and we'll put the bump into the normal so the wood looks slightly bumpy. So what I'm going to do is click on the mapping and the noise texture and the color ramp from the wood texture, so all of these 3 nodes, and I'll press Ctrl-Shift-D to duplicate the nodes, and then I'll press F to bring them out of the frame and just click to place them right there. And I'm just going to Ctrl-Shift-select the color ramp to preview it. Now, you might think if we are just duplicating it, then we could just instead use this texture instead. We can just put this texture into the normal. But the problem with this texture is that it's so detailed that it just looks really tiny and kind of grainy, and it doesn't really look that good for a bump map because it's just way too noisy. So that's why I'm duplicating these textures. We're going to duplicate the noise texture, but then we're just going to turn the detail down so that the bump map will just be a little bit more bumpy and it won't be quite so noisy, because I just find it doesn't look good with like the detail and the roughness so high. So we just duplicated the noise texture, but now we're going to change the settings. So I want to keep the scale the same so that the texture aligns, but I'm going to turn the detail just to 3, and I'm going to turn the roughness to a 0.5, but then I'll keep the other settings how they are. So we're going to use this instead as the bump map. Then what I also want to do is select this noise texture and press Ctrl-Shift-D to duplicate it, but keep the wire plugged up. And we're just going to stick this noise texture right down here. So we have another noise texture. Let's just preview this noise texture, but I want to change this noise texture a bit just so that we have a little bit more noise over the material. So for this noise texture, I'm going to turn the scale to 10, and we're going to turn the detail to 10, and then I'm going to turn the roughness to 0.5, I'll turn the lacunarity to 2, and the distortion to 0. So now you can see it still is a bit stretched because it's going through the mapping, but it doesn't look quite like wood, it just looks a bit more noisy. So we have this texture, and we're going to be putting these both into the bump. So let's search for a bump node to convert it to bump data, and I'll just drop the bump node right up here. And what we want to do is put the color ramp color into the height value, and then I can preview the bump node, and if I just zoom in there, you can kind of see what that's doing. So if I turn up like the roughness really high and the detail really high, if I turn these way up, it's going to look really noisy. You can kind of see that's what it would look like if the detail was really high. It just looks really grainy, and that doesn't really look good. So that's why I kept the detail lower. Now this is a smooth floor material, so I don't want it to look super bumpy. I do want it to look like the wood is polished. So what we're going to do is change the distance value, and I'm going to turn the distance value to a 0.0001. And so that way, now if I zoom in here, you can see it's very subtle, but it is just slightly bumpy. So I can now put the bump normal into the normal, and I can just preview the principled shader. So now if I like zoom into the reflections, you can kind of see there's a little bit of bump. So I'm just going to drag the bump node up here, but then what I'm going to do is hit Shift-D to duplicate the bump and drop it right here so we have a second bump. And I'm going to take this noise texture, so the bottom one, and we're going to put the factor into the height value to convert it to bump data. So I can just preview this bump here. You can kind of see what it's doing. If I just turn up the bump strength, you can kind of see it's adding a lot more noise. And I'm going to turn the distance value for the second bump to a 0.002 and just hit enter. So you can see it just looks a little bit more noisy. And so now I can just preview the principled shader, and we just have a tiny little bit more noise over the surface. So I'm going to box select these nodes here and press F, and I can just call this bump. I'm just going to call it like wood bump and hit enter. And then here for these bump nodes, I can press F and just call this bump and hit enter. Now the last bump value that I want to add is a little bit of bump to make it look like the edges of the planks are going in. So I'm going to select this bump node and hit Shift-D to duplicate it and drop it right here. And then what we can do is we can take the wood planks mix color. If I preview this, you can see that we can put into the normal. So I'm going to take the mix result and I can drag this down here into the height value. So now I can just Control-Shift select the principled shader. And so now we have the planks going into this bump. But if I zoom in closely to the edges, you can't really see it doing much. That's because I want to turn the distance to just a 0.1, so it's a lot stronger, but then I also want to turn this filter width to 1. So if I turn the filter width to 1, now you can see there's a tiny little bit of a crack there in between the planks. Now I could make the filter width bigger and bigger, but if I make it too big, it just looks a bit weird, it looks too thick, so I'm just going to keep it at a 1. So now I can zoom out here and you can see there is the plank material. Now the parquet flooring has planks which are going in different directions. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this entire node setup, and then we're going to make it be going in a separate direction, and then we will mix them together. So what I want to do is hold down the Shift key and right click and drag over these wires and then let go, and that's going to add a reroute, so it'll just bring them all together. So I can now just click on this mapping and I'll hit Shift-D to duplicate it and drop it here, so we have another mapping after the first one. And then I'm going to select the texture coordinate and mapping here and just drag these way down, so we have another mapping which is just controlling this group of textures. So now what I'm going to do is click and drag to box select all of these nodes. So not the mapping nodes, and we're not going to select the material output, but all of these nodes here. And I'm going to press Control-Shift-D, and I'm just going to drop it down here. So now we just have two of the same materials. And I can also drag the material output here into the very middle. So now to mix them together, we want to select this principled shader and shift select the other principled shader, and we're going to press Ctrl 0, and that's going to add this mix shader, which will mix them together. Now, if I just drag the factor back and forth, you can see it's not really blending between them. It actually is, but you can't see any difference, and that's because the two shaders are exactly the same. So if I just go way down here and zoom in way down here to this mapping node, what we want to do is we want to rotate it. So I'm going to take the Z value and we're going to rotate that by 90 degrees. So now if I preview this one, you can see it's going back and forth, but then if I Control Shift select this one, you can see it's going up and down. So if I mix them together with the mix shader, you can see we're blending between them. But now what I want to do is just have little spots here where like 4 planks of wood are going up and down, and then 4 planks of wood are going left and right. So to do this, we need to create a mask, which is going to determine what parts are going to be the vertical ones and what parts are going to be the horizontal ones. So to do this, we want to search for a checker texture, and we're going to put the checker texture color into the factor. And then what we're also going to do is go all the way back to the mapping, and we're going to take the mapping vector and drag this all the way over, and we're going to stick it here into the vector of the checker texture, so it's using the UV coordinates. So now here for the top color, I'm going to make it fully white, and then here for the bottom color, I'm going to make it fully black, and we're going to leave the scale at 5. So the checker texture has black here and then white here, and so that's determining what parts are going to be the vertical ones and what parts are going to be the horizontal ones. So now you can see we have like a horizontal one here and a vertical one here. So now that's looking a lot more interesting, and it's really looking like the parquet floor. So I'm going to box select these two nodes here, and I'll press F, and I'm just going to call this Mix Shaders. Now there's just a few more things that I want to do. I want to add just a little bit more variation in the colors of the planks. So if I just go up here to the top material, let's go to the base color, and I can go to the hue saturation value. So now if I drag this up and down, you can see it's just going to change the color of some of the planks. So I'm going to turn the value to a 1.5. So 1.5, so now you can see some of the planks are just a little bit lighter. And then the last thing that I want to do to really make this look like a parquet floor is to make everything diagonal. So if I just go right over here, way down here to the original mapping, the very first mapping, I'm just going to take the Z value and I'm going to type in 45. So rotation Z will change to 45. So that is the entire procedural material. So I'm now going to show you how to join it together into a node group so you can add the custom values. So what I'm going to do is click and drag to box select all of the nodes except the material output. And also we're not going to select the texture coordinate. We're going to keep the texture coordinate outside the node group, so you can choose between using the UVs or the object coordinates if you want to. So select all the nodes in between, and I'll press Ctrl G. So Ctrl G will join it together into a node group. I'll hit the tab key to outside the node group, and I'm going to drag these nodes over and then drag the nodes over here to the material output, and let's just make it bigger, and then I'll copy the material name and paste it here into the node group. So let's now select the node group, and I'll hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel. Let's just make this really small so we have a lot more space, and you can go to the group tab, and you can see there are these group sockets. So what I'm going to do is add values into the group input to control them outside of the node group. So the first value that I want to add is the scale to change the size of the entire material. So the mapping node here is plugged up to all the textures, so we'll put the scale into the extra socket here, and then I'll click on the scale, but you can see it's going to be 3 values for the X, Y, and Z axis, but I just want it to be 1 value, so we're going to change the type from vector to float, so it is 1 value. Then I want to turn the default value to 1, but you can see the texture is still missing. That's because I need to hit tab to go outside the node group, and I need to turn the scale back to 1. So now that's going to change the size of the entire material, so we'll go back into the node group. Then I want to add all the custom colors, and you can see there are the same colors for the bottom one and also for the top one. And so I want to add both of the values into the same sockets so that they control both of them. So what I'm going to do is click on the group input, and I'll duplicate it, and I'll drag it right up here, and we'll put it behind the wood texture here. So just drag it in here. And then I can take color A and color B and the other color A and color B, and we're going to put all of these into these sockets. But then what I want to do is add the same exact colors on the bottom ones into the same sockets. So we're going to grab the group input and move it down, but I'm going to hit F to bring it out of the frame, and we're going to drag it right down here. Let's also maybe box select these nodes and drag them down so we have a little bit more space. And I'm going to drag this right down here. So now we're going to take this color A and put that into the same socket, so the top one. Then color B, put that into the top color B. Then we're going to take this one here and put that into the other color A. And this one here, we're going to put that into the color B. So because they're going into the same exact sockets, these 4 colors here are going to change it for both the top material and the bottom material. So now we're just going to rename all of these by double clicking on them. So I'm going to call it wood color 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now I want to control the brightness of the planks. planks. So I'm going to duplicate the group input and I'm going to drag it right up here to the very top of the node setup. And so you can see here on this mix, we have this factor which I can drag up and down. And so that's going to change the brightness of the planks. So I'll put the factor into the extra socket and I'm going to double click on this to rename it and I'm going to call it planks brightness 1. And we can drag this here into the node group if we want to. Then I'm going to duplicate this and hit F to bring it out of the node group. And we're going to drag it all the way down here and stick it right over here into this group of wood planks here. So for the bottom one. And we're basically going to do the exact same thing, but instead of it putting it into the same socket, we're going to drag this mix factor here into a new socket. And then this one I can call planks brightness 2. So outside the node group, you can see we have the first planks brightness and then the second planks brightness. So they control the different planks in a textured pattern. So let's hit tab to go back into the node group. Then I want to control the roughness of the material, so I'm going to duplicate another group input and drag it over here. And what I can do is take this roughness here, we'll take the hue saturation value from the roughness, and I'll put the value into the extra socket. But then I want to control the same exact socket on the other material so that there's just one value to control both materials. So I'm going to drag the group input down here, and let's take the other roughness, the hue saturation value, we'll put the value into the same exact socket here. And then let's open this up, and I'll double click on it to rename it, and I'll rename it to roughness. Then I want to do basically the same thing for the bump maps. So I'm going to drag the group input right up here. We'll use the same group input and you can see we have these two bumps which are controlling the bump of the wood. So I'm going to put this strength into the extra socket, then this strength into the extra socket or the same exact socket. Then I'm going to drag the strength way down and let's drag it actually way down here. So underneath this bump, and we're going to take this strength, put it into the same socket, and this strength and put it into the same socket. So all of those 4 different bump maps are going into the same exact socket. So let's double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to call it wood bump strength. So let's just drag the group input back up here. And now what I want to do is I want to take this last bump here. This is going to be the bump of the planks, and we'll put this into a new socket. And then let's hit G to grab. We'll hit F to bring it out of the frame, and we'll drag it all the way back to the very bottom. And we're going to take this strength here, and we're going to put that into the extra same strength value. So now this one here, we're going to have one value which will control the planks. So this one, I'm going to call it planks bump strength. So now I can drag this group input right up here and we'll just kind of drag it into the middle of the node setups. And then the last value that I want to add is the rotation value. So if you don't want the parquet floor to be on an angle here, you can rotate it. So let's go all the way back here to this mapping, the first mapping, and we'll put the rotation into the extra socket. And then I can just rename this to wood rotation. Now there's a couple other values that I forgot that I wanted to add right in here, and that is that I want to control the noise textures which are controlling the wood. So I'm going to duplicate the group input again and let's drag it up here. And I want to control the noise detail, the noise roughness, and the noise distortion. So we're going to drag the group input right here behind the wood texture, and I can take the detail, put that into the extra socket, the roughness into the extra socket, and then also the distortion into the extra socket. And then we're going to drag the group input down here over to the wood texture, and we're going to do the same exact thing so that these values will control both textures at once. So the detail into the detail, the roughness into the roughness, and the distortion into the distortion. And let's just drag this right up here, kind of in the very center, and then I can just drag this down here so we can see it bigger, and I'm just going to rename this. So I'm going to just add the word noise to the starting of this, the noise detail, we have the noise roughness, and then we have the noise distortion. And then I want to put these after the roughness value. So I'm going to drag this noise detail and drop it right here. So it's underneath the roughness, and then drag and drop this right here, and then drag and drop this up there. So we have the roughness, the noise detail, roughness, and distortion, and then we have the wood bump strength and the planks bump strength, and then finally the wood rotation. So I'm going to hit the N key to close the side panel, and then we have all of these other group inputs here, and what I want to do is select the group input and press Control H. So Control H is just going to minimize it so that it's smaller and it looks nicer. So we're just going to select each group input, and we're going to press Control H just to minimize it, just so the node group looks a lot nicer. So we'll make that smaller. And this one's smaller as well, just kind of drag that down there. So let's now hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and I'll just zoom in here to the material, and let's just preview the final material. So you can use between like the generated coordinates or the UV coordinates or the object coordinates. I'm going to use the UVs, and then we have the overall scale to change the size of the material. Then we have all the different colors. So we have colors 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then we have the planks brightness 1, and then also the planks brightness 2, so you can have some more variation or even make it look a bit checkered. Then we also have the roughness of the material, so you can make it like a really shiny floor or a more rough floor. And then we also have the different noise settings. So if I just zoom in close to the wood, we have the noise detail, we have the noise roughness, and the noise distortion, so you can make the wood look a bit different with those values. Then we also have the wood bump strength, so you can make it like really strong if you want to look like a pretty rough wood, or keep it pretty subtle and pretty smooth. And then we also have the planks bump strength. And then finally we have the wood rotation, so we can rotate this around to just make the wood diagonal. And if you enjoy these videos and you'd like to help support the channel, you can purchase this procedural material on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, and that's a great way to help support the channel. You can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials. So my Ultimate Material Pack comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also purchase my procedural material packs if you'd just like to purchase packs of 10 materials, like for example my procedural metals material pack, or my procedural wood material pack, or my procedural food material packs. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.